And then he moves to sword, correct?
Yeah.
What
So
type
after the
of
dagger comes
sword?
the sword. What?
What type of sword does he show?
It's a long sword.
Oh, a long sword. Okay.
Sort of like this.
Long sword.
And it has a handle that is long enough you can get two hands on it. But it's not a two-handed sword with a really long handle. It's the knightly sidearm.
Okay, understand.
Yeah. So it's short enough that it is easily drawn from the waist, and it is, you know, it's small enough that you can comfortably use it with one hand, but it has enough space and size on it that you can also get two hands on it. But you can manipulate it with one hand, no problem.
Okay, you can or you cannot?
You can.
You can, yes.
Yeah, I just did.
Yes, you did. That's why I just want to. I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Yes, that's right. You can, of course. Okay, and then does he show different swords or only one type of sword?
Okay.
In illustrations.
Generally speaking, for the sword out of armor on foot is one kind of sword, though there is one exception to that in one of the stretto plays. We can get into what stretto means in a minute if you like, where in the middle of a sequence, the sword goes from being an ordinary longsword to being what is clearly a one-handed sword. I think the point is it doesn't actually matter because the sword is the sword. Okay. In the armored combat, he gives at the end of the armored combat section, armored sword in armor section, beg pardon. So before the poleaxe, he shows two variations on the sword. And these actually have beautiful silvered blades. One of them is a nasty murder spike that has it has a spear point. The blade itself is blunt. It has a rondel, which is a kind of a ring of basically a steel disc, and a grip that slides up and down the blade so that your hand is protected by the steel rondel. Okay, so as you're fighting, okay, right, so you would have over my front hand, now I should be in armor, but over my front hand there would be a rondel which can slide up and down the blade. Yeah, and the last, say, 9-10 inches of the blade is a kind of spear point, which is sharp and pointy. But generally speaking, with armor, you don't cut, you either hammer or you spike.
Yes.
Yeah. And on the pommel of this one, there are these 4 big spikes, right? And the other one he shows is a bit more elegant, and it has a long pointed pommel. So when you're getting close and you're pommel striking, you have a spike there. And instead of having a sliding rondel, it just has a regular blade, only there's a kind of cutout section around here for the hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We actually do, this is something that kind of freaks people out who don't know about this kind of sword, is, you know, this is a sharp blade. Okay. We grab it, no problem. Hit things, no problem. And I still have all my fingers.
Yes.
So that's one thing you see a lot in Fiore. That again, when we first came across the book like 25 years ago, it freaked us out. It's like, you can't do that, you'll cut your hand. But actually, no. Fiore loves us and wants us to be happy, and he won't teach us wrong. So as long as you do it properly, so that the hand isn't sliding, that is just perfectly fine.
Have you ever seen any reproductions with those spikes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
every now and then a Fiore scholar persuades a smith to make one, and then all of his friends get very jealous for a little bit, and then it usually ends up, you know, gathering dust on the wall somewhere because its only function is to murder people in armor, and most of your friends don't have armor.
Yeah, of course.
And even if your friends do have armor, they don't want to get murdered with a murder spike. They want you to like hit them with something that isn't going to kill them.
Of course not. Yes, of course. Interesting, very. And then this section on swordsmanship is very detailed. Am I correct?
Yeah. So we have in the Getty manuscript, it's a little bit different than the others.
Yeah.
It starts with 11 plays of the sword in one hand.
Yeah.
Then follows with 20 plays of what's called the Zorro Largo, where your opponent attacks and you parry, and you're basically free to keep striking in a kind of sword fighty way, right? And then we have 23 plays of the Zorro Strato, which is there's been an attack and some kind of defense, and the weapons are sort of bound together in such a way that you're not free to simply leave the bind and strike. Okay, so you have to stick with the connection between the blades. And so what Fiore tends to do in that situation is enter into some kind of grappling play. There is a lot of grappling at the sword in Fiore.
Wow.
Okay. And then what follows from that is the armored combat plays. But actually, there's a really kind of cool little between the sword on foot out of armor and the sword on foot in armor. There's a very cool little section where he sort of summarizes what you should do if you are attacked by a cut, a thrust, or a thrown weapon. He does deal with that. And then he has this kind of bizarre little section where you're standing there with a staff and a dagger. Right? A staff and a dagger.
Yeah.
Okay? And basically what you do is it doesn't work so well on a wooden floor, you're supposed to be outside for this, okay, is whatever attack comes in, you parry it with the staff, get in and strike. So you get this kind of open.
It's like a wall.
Yeah. Super simple. And then he has a section what to do if you've got somebody attacking you with a spear and all you have is 2 clubs. So let me just dig out my 2 clubs. Because of course I have clubs. Right? And of course you have a dagger somewhere. So, you know, this is the medieval period, right? So you have a dagger and you have 2 clubs. And what you do, these are actually like, you know, physical training clubs. You'll be very familiar with these.
Yes, yes.
I've adapted these. These are to my own design. So they're better for like sword practice. Like edges and anyway, so you're there with your clubs, and what you do is you throw the one in your right hand, right? So that's gone. I'm not actually going to throw it in my study.
Of course.
And parry whatever's coming with the one in your left hand, and then you stab with your dagger. Right? It's very simple. Now, why he puts it there between the sword on foot out of armor and the armored combat plays, I don't know. But it's clearly in the right place in the manuscript because it's actually drawn. The first of these odd plays is drawn on the same page as the last of the sword plays, so it's not been rebound in the wrong place. That's one of the kind of occupational hazards of dealing with manuscripts. Is and you know this as well as anyone. Sometimes, you know, pages fall out or whatever, and they get stitched back in the wrong place.
Yes. Oh,
or
yeah.
They just get lost, which is very frustrating.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, so he has these like odd plays in there, but they are basically, it's the same idea. No matter what you're carrying or what you're holding, you get your opponent to commit their weapon. And when that happens, you get control of it with one thing and you hit them with something else, right? And if you happen to have a spare weapon, by all means, throw it at their face, but only if you've got a spare, right? You wouldn't throw your dagger because if you miss, then you're unarmed. But if you've got 2 clubs and a dagger, throw one of the clubs, that's fine. It's fascinating. It kind of covers, without actually covering every possible eventuality, it does seem to cover all eventualities. It's amazing.
Yeah. And what type of armor does he show? Is it Milanese armor?
Okay, well, the armor differs a little bit between the various manuscripts, partly because they're written at different times. And I should be completely frank here, armor combat is not my area of specialization. And so armor history is not my area of specialization, but we're talking, okay, most of it is plate armor, as you would think of, knights in shining armor, okay? Yeah. Some of it, in some illustrations, you see things that look like a brigandine, which is a kind of a coat which has like these steel plates attached to it. And obviously there's some mail, chain mail as most people think of it, which is also illustrated in places. Okay. One of the really interesting things is, at one point he talks about thrusting through a breastplate with a poleaxe. Okay. And the thing is, he's writing sometime around 1400, and sometime around the 1380s, the Milanese figured out how to make curved plate that was of hardened and tempered steel. Before that, most plate armor was iron, not steel.
Ah, good point.
Right? Which makes all the difference. Iron makes perfectly good armor, but it can be punctured a lot more easily than plate steel.
Absolutely.
Right? So when he's talking about shoving the poleaxe through a cuirass, he's probably talking about an iron cuirass.
Yeah.
Right?
Good point.
And you probably wouldn't find an instruction like that in a book written, say, 30 or 40 years later, when a lot more people are wearing steel.
Yeah.
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 And again, that's something I only know about that because a colleague of mine called Dr. Alan Williams, who is an archaeometallurgist, he came to my school in Helsinki once and gave a lecture on sort of iron and steel in the Middle Ages. And I was like, oh my God, that explains it. Fiore was not wrong. He was talking about punching through an iron cuirass, not a steel cuirass.
Yeah, very interesting.
Right?
That's true. And okay, after this section on swords, then he talks about pole arms. Am I correct?
Yeah. Poleaxes and spears.
Oh, pole axes and spears.
Yeah.
Could you explain to our viewers what is the difference between a pole axe and a spear?
Yeah, a poleaxe is basically I've got one in the shed. I can nip out and get it if you like. I forgot to bring it in this morning. So a poleaxe is a kind of a hammer or axe head. I think you've got war hammer, you've got poleaxe, they're called various things. And fundamentally what you have is a set of blades and spikes on the end of a fairly short stick, maybe 5 feet long.
Okay.
I mean, poleaxe is we have like war hammers, which are single-handed things for like smacking people in the head, but they also grow to like a 5-foot polearm type thing, usually a little bit shorter than the person holding it. Okay.
Okay.
So it's for fighting on foot in armor, right?
On foot.
And it was a classic knightly weapon. Okay. This is not the same thing as the forest bill or the Morris pike, or these bigger blades, which are basically adapted agricultural implements, and they tend to be on longer staffs.
Yes.
So this is a knightly weapon for fighting on foot.
Yeah.
You wouldn't take a poleaxe on the back of a horse because you wouldn't be able to swing it around. There are like the smaller single-handed versions for which you can use a horseback, but what Fiore is talking about is like about this high on you, however tall you are, and spike at one end and a head with usually some kind of armor-piercing spike, some kind of multi-spike thing or an axe blade, and another spike on the top. So you can thrust with it and you can cut or smash with either side of the axe. And then of course you've got the butt spike for
butt spike. And spear was mainly for thrusting, am I correct?
Yeah, Fiore says that's the only thing you should do with a spear. But again, the spear he's describing is about maybe 6 foot long. It's a bit longer than a poleaxe, and it has a fairly small steel sharp spearhead, but it also has an iron at the foot called the pedale, which Fiore says is as good as the one at the head. So it's not the same, but it's a proper steel little spike, so that because generally speaking, let's say you attack somebody with a spear, this is the pointy end. When they parry it out of the way, that's the next thing we do.
Yes.
Yeah? And you want to be able to smash that through somebody's visor, so it needs a spike on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we have the spear, which is not the same as the lance on horseback. Well, sometimes it is. I mean, you can use those things on horseback. But when you think of jousting lances, they are much, much, much longer.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And what we're talking about is a spear that can be comfortably used on foot and also on horseback.
That's right. And then he talks about fighting on horse,
Yes.
wrestling, sword, and what else?
Well, it starts with the spear.
Oh, okay.
Because it goes from the spear on foot to the spear on horseback.
Mm.
See how beautifully structured this thing is? Spear on foot, spear on horseback, sword against spear on horseback, sword against sword on horseback, wrestling on horseback, and then the giavarino, or some kind of spear-like object. It's called a giavarino, which is, it's more like a glaive. It's kind of an Italian glaive.
Glaive,
and it has a blade about this long, which has a big kind of triangular blade, and you can cut with that and you can thrust with that. And it's,
I have seen that.
The closest thing for our Japanese friends would be a naginata.
Yeah.
It's not the same as a naginata, but it's kind of closely related.
Yes. Okay, very interesting. And after he teaches them, then the book ends, correct?
Yeah, but it ends in a really interesting way. Okay, because rather than just like ending, he has this section at the very end where he is talking about. Okay, so you've done your defense with the giavarino or spear type thing on foot against somebody on a horseback. And incidentally, I've tested it with Jason Kingsley, who has the Modern History TV series on YouTube, and we have a video of us working on that play on his channel. So I should maybe find a link for that and stick it in the show notes for you.
Sure.
And at the end, there's this picture, there's a kind of a little castle, and there's somebody running away on a horse to that castle, and there's you with your garter on to show you're the scholar, stabbing that person in the armpit with a sword. And the text goes something along the lines of, I have chased you back to your castle where all your horrible friends are, and I stab you, right? And the picture after that is two horses tied to a tree, you know, kind of their reins are just attached to the tree. Yeah. And one of the horses is in armor and one of the horses is not. Okay. And what we have there, I think, and many of my colleagues agree with me, is the castle is a memory palace. In each room, there may be a different opponent with a different kind of weapon or whatever. And so you store your art in a memory palace as a castle, right? Or perhaps you store your art in the form of a tree, right? Where you have, you connect the various parts of it together using the treatises. So basically, I think it is a pretty sophisticated reference to the two most common mnemonic devices used in that period for storing large quantities of information.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this was not some meathead with a sword just scribbling down some crap that he thought up. This is a really, really sophisticated book.
That's right. Absolutely. And okay, and this was this, and we have no further information on Fiore after this manuscript or from other sources mentioning him.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, if I did a bit more, thing is, my primary area of interest isn't actually Fiore the man. As you can tell, I couldn't quite remember what city he had defended. I had to look it up. Yes. Right. I have the book in my head, right? Yes. And the system. I've practiced all of it that I can reasonably practice. Some things are just impractical to practice. Like there's the poison poleaxe technique, where you have literally a box of poison dust at the end of your poleaxe and a string, and when you get close to the person and maybe the weapons whack together, you pull the string and the poison dust flies out into their face, which of course will go through a visor.
Of course,
it goes through the breathing holes.
That's right? Interesting.
And will turn you blind. And he says, and it's glorious Italian. He says in this kind of tone, like, and of course, my lord, he's addressing the dedicatee of the book, so the Marquis of Ferrara. And of course, my lord, good my lord, you would never use such a technique. I include it here simply for the sake of knowledge, right? And then he gives the recipe for the dust.
He does.
He does. And botanist friends of mine say that will blind you.
What is it? What is this recipe? Do you remember?
I've written it up on my blog.
Okay.
It's called, I think, there's a post called Blinded by Botany, Medieval Maths Blinded by Botany or something like that.
Okay.
I can find it and send you the link.
Interesting.
Because like the recipe is there, and it revolves around the sap of the titimalo flower, and we didn't know what that was. And then a friend of mine called Alexander Petty actually found, through starting with like medieval herbaries, which is like illustrated books describing plants and their uses with like, pictures of the plants. He traced the titimalo through to relatively modern herbaries and found out the exact kind of genus and species of it.
Interesting.
Right, so you can actually find that flower and make poison polax dust if you want.
Does he depict his face in the picture?
No. It's two people in armor, and their polax is across, and one had like this kind of woof of dust going in their face.
And in general, can you see him? I was talking to a colleague, and he said in one of them, in Talhofer, you can see Talhofer's face.
Oh, okay, right. So this image, which is like the super famous Senyo page image, that has, some people believe that's a picture of Fiore. There is no reason to believe it isn't, but also no particular reason to believe it is. So it isn't. There isn't something which is actually like highlighted in the book as this is a picture of the master himself.
Okay.
Which is a shame.
Yeah. Okay, Guy, and Fiore is the book I know you use many sources, but may I say that Fiore is one of your major sources?
Yeah, it's one of the ones I've done the most work on. Okay. It's certainly the one I've written the most books about.
Oh, okay. Very interesting.
Because, I mean, there's a lot of material there, and, most people want to do longsword, but you can't really understand his longsword material unless you also understand his dagger material and some of the wrestling. Because, I mean, for example, in the longsword section on foot, he doesn't show a defense against a pommel strike. He shows loads of pommel strikes, but no defenses against them. But if you think about it, a pommel coming towards you, like this, you defend against it exactly the same way that you would defend against a dagger coming towards you like this.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Right? So basically, as I see it, most of the pommel strike defenses, he does show one defense against a pommel strike, and that is in the mounted combat section. But most of what you would need to know about dealing with pommel strikes and dealing with your opponent's attempts to kind of wrap you up and smack you up, once the fight has got to that stage, you're in dagger and wrestling. Right, so most of the longsword plays deal with what happens before you get to that stage.
That's right. Excellent. Thank you very much. It was very informative, very detailed. I'm sure many viewers are going to love this explanation, Guy. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and all this information.
Oh, you're most welcome. Viewers. I can talk about Fiore all day.
I believe you. Oh, just last point before I forget. Would you please give me the link? I'm going to put it in the description, so people who want to buy your books, they can come. And if you have any specific recommendation on your books on Fiore, you can please let me know. So I will put it in the description. So our viewers who would like to order the books, right, about Fiore can order your books, because it's always good to have interpretations, just not buy a picture, right? So that's the reason.
Okay. Yeah, probably the best thing to do is I've put together a web page of resources for your viewers, which is at guywindsor.net/Raz, R-A-Z.
Okay.
Or R-A-Z for the Americans. Same letter.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And I'll put links to, like you can get like facsimiles of the book, and there are scholarly editions, and I've written, I don't know, 4 or 5 books. I'll link to all of those in there, and also include pictures from the manuscript, so you can kind of see what it is, and various useful links so you can go and find out more about Fiore, and links to videos so you can see the techniques in action, that kind of thing. So
perfect.
It's probably the easiest thing is if we just send people there, and then they can find whatever particular thing they're interested in.
That's the easiest thing. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, Guy, and you will send me also some pictures for Fiore, as you mentioned that.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you very much, and I wish you a nice day, and see you soon, hopefully, on our channel again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.